Excellent. Thanks so much, Michelle. Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to be here with you today, and I'm happy that you are here taking control of your job search and career management. As Michelle was saying, this webinar will be recorded, and as will the other ones. Please keep yourself on mute, and also just to help with the streaming and prevent any kind of disruption, please consider taking yourself off camera as well. And yes, don't forget to stick around all the way till the end when we will be doing a draw for the Tim Hortons gift card. Okay, so let's get started here. I would have first, of course, like to acknowledge that I do have the honor and the privilege of working, studying, and living in a region south of the Fraser River, which overlaps with the unceded traditional and ancestral lands of the Kwantlen, Musqueam, Katsi, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kikite, and Coquitlam peoples. And for those of you that don't know, Kwantlen means tireless runner. We have a lot to cover today, so this is why we're getting started right now. But I did want to remind everyone of the services that you do have afforded to you as KPU students or KPU alumni. So please visit us at the KPU Career Center, and these are just a few of the services that you have afforded to you. So please visit us and take advantage of these wonderful services that you are, paying for. Okay, and also a reminder, if you're already here, you already know this, right? But these are the upcoming webinars that are coming up. So hopefully you'll be registering for the rest of these, and you can go ahead and do that, as you already know, at kpu.ca/career day in order to register for all of these webinars, as well as the main event, which is, of course, on Wednesday, March 9th from 12 till 3 p.m. This is what we're going to be covering today. Very briefly, discuss what a resume is and what its purpose is. I will actually be reviewing section by section of an actual resume as well. And I'm doing this based on a lot of the resume that I receive, any questions and so forth that I tend to receive around resumes. So I really did put this resume, this webinar together based on where I see your needs are primarily. Of course, we'll be covering accomplishment statements, and if you don't know what they are, don't worry, we're going to be covering that. The importance of customizing, of course, reviewing that applicant tracking system, the ATS system. Now, we're going to be spending a relatively short amount of time during this hour on cover letters, but that's not to take away the importance of cover letters. I spend the bulk of my time on resumes, but as we'll see when we get there, cover letters are pretty crucial in the application process. So within cover letters, we're going to be having a look at a structural breakdown. So each of the paragraphs, going to wrap it up, have some questions, and then do the draw. And so what I will ask, feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and I will be getting to those at the end of today's session, because perhaps your question will be answered later on in the webinar. So a resume is a marketing tool, right? It's your marketing tool, and it's there to highlight your most relevant skills, work experience, accomplishments, education, and the goal.
Sorry, Chantal, I think you're muted.
Yeah,
Oh, my apologies. And I did say that at the very beginning as well. Sorry about that. Let's go back. Let's go back and cover that. Sorry about that. Well, I want to start certainly by doing
Chantal,
my
you were only muted for a few seconds, I believe, so you can definitely go ahead with.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Oh, I wonder how that happened then. Okay, here we go. I think this might be where we ended up.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Michelle. Okay, So moving on, and that last point, really important. The goal of a resume is, of course, to get you that interview, get you that meeting with a specific company, which is why it's so important for you to customize each and every time. So what makes for an effective resume? Well, of course, we do want to make sure that our skills, our education, experience, and achievements are all very clearly lined out. So we want to make sure that the formatting is very easy for the reader to ingest, really easy to take in, and very easy to spot on the document. Because for some of you, you might already know this, but the initial viewing is about 6 seconds. So you really want to make sure that you hook them early on with the most relevant information for them. Of course, that comes with making sure that that document is customized and that that it's specific to the position that you're applying for. And we'll talk about ways for you to do that. Using action words, so really strong verbs to describe your experience. And we use those through accomplishment statements, which we will be covering. Whenever possible and as much as possible, you do want to quantify your experience. So use numbers, percentages, and so forth. They really stand out in a sea of letters. So it really does kind of manipulate the eye to that bit of information. And it almost makes the information that you are presenting factual and truthful. And then you want to make sure that they want to read it, right? That it's a pretty nice ratio of black and white on the page, and then it's not just massive clusters of words. It has to be attractive, and you want to entice them with that look as well. Goes without saying to please avoid any spelling or grammatical errors. And of course, it's important to have someone, another set of eyes look at that so that you can make sure to avoid any spelling and grammatical errors. So here we have a look at a resume, very traditional resume that's very clearly outlined. It's very easy to read. Each section is labeled correctly, and it's very easy to identify the information early on. So let's break this up into the sum of its parts here. So we're going to start with the personal information. So that's your header, and you really don't need more than your full name, which should be the biggest thing on the page. You almost want to scream at them what your name is, your telephone number, email address. Might I suggest that you avoid Yahoo or Hotmail? You want to stick with a more modern email address, perhaps Gmail or Outlook, and then your LinkedIn profile as well. Now, if, for example, you're targeting a company that is in the same city that you live, then go ahead and consider adding your city into your contact information as well. That's completely optional, but it's certainly not necessary for you to have your full address on there. You want to keep that consistency as well. So when we hop over to resumes, to cover letters rather, you will you also want to keep that same header style on your cover letter, just as you want to keep that same header style on your reference sheet when it comes time to you to hand that in as well. The next one we'll see is the tagline or a job title. Now, in this case, it's simply a job title I put there at the top of the resume. It's nice and easy for the employer to read, and they'll know exactly what it is you're targeting. If I want to turn this into a tagline, I might add, something about myself that makes me more qualified for the position. If, for example, I know that they are looking for a health sciences graduate, I might put that information up there. If I know that they're looking for someone who's bilingual, I might add that there. So I like 3 kind of points. So perhaps your degree, the title that you're applying for, and the fact that you're bilingual for this particular role. And then we have our summary section. So that's the next big section. It's the kind of the primary section on our resume. And essentially it is what it's called. It is a summary of your resume. And what you're doing with this section is you're kind of whetting their palate. You're enticing them to read on about you, and it summarizes for them in a nice, neat little package what they're about to read about you. And it lets them know early on that you are indeed qualified for the position that you're applying for. So this particular summary, I called it a professional summary, but you might choose to have something like profile or summary of skills or qualifications. Whatever it is you choose there, might I suggest that you avoid writing an objective? And the reason for that is because an objective tells an employer what it is you want, right? To obtain the science educator position with ABC Academy. A professional summary or a profile, or however way you want to call this section, tells the employer what it is you can do for them. So in that initial 6-second review that a recruiter or human resource person might give you, they're going to spend a pretty good chunk of time on this section. Right, so it is very much a mini resume. It's summarizing what it is they're about to read in your resume. And again, it just kind of entices them, lets them know early on, I am qualified, please continue reading on. So for this case, I did indeed write this summary in response to the qualifications of the position itself, right? So the information that I write in this short paragraph does reflect their needs. Now, another option, of course, is for you to break this up. Instead of having a short paragraph, you can certainly break this up into a bullet point form. My preference is a short paragraph, maybe complemented by a couple of bullets, but for a more professional type of resume, I think a short paragraph really does look quite nice and neat and concise. So next up, we have our education section, and I will be covering the order of the sections a little bit later on. But we have the education section, and you can see it's very neatly laid out here. In that, I've identified the section as the education section. I've also identified my degree, diploma, or certificate early on, right? We want to write from left to right. So the top left of this section is what's most important. What's most important is the title of the degree, diploma, or certificate. In this case, it's a Bachelor of Science in health science. And then I have the date over to the far right-hand side. Right below that, we have the school. And then you'll notice that I have a few bullets that I've included. So relevant coursework, again, I've really let the position itself dictate to me what I include in this section. I might choose to tell one employer some of my courses, and I might choose to tell a different employer a different set of courses. I've also put in there that I've developed some really great teamwork skills, and these teamwork skills were developed through applied group projects, as well as an active participation on the KPU volleyball team. So this, again, I'm no longer just stating that I'm a strong team player, I'm collaborative, I can multitask. I'm supporting it with real, actual experience. And then I finish it off with a couple of awards that I won while I was studying at KPU. And don't be upset if you didn't ever hear of these awards. I've completely made them up. Nice, neat little package. Next up, we have the experience section, and this is completely up to you if you want to do this, but you can certainly merge your work experience, your paid work experience, with your volunteer experience, or you can separate them into two separate sections. But please don't leave your volunteer experience off. It's extremely valuable. And even though you don't necessarily see that it's relevant to the employer, the fact that you are giving back to the community in various ways says stuff about your character that the employer will pick up on. So here we have Chantal, myself, let's say, as a camp leader. Again, you'll notice that my format is very exactly identical to my education format, in that in place of the degree, I have my job title. The date is over on the far right-hand side, lined up perfectly. Right below that, the employer, which replaces the name of the school. And then I have some bullets that identify some of my accomplishments while I was in this particular role. So one thing that I want to point out rather is that this person is still working seasonally as a camp leader, and so they will be writing their accomplishment statements in the present tense. But you'll also notice that they accomplished something in particular and kind of left a legacy project behind at this company or at this employer. And so in that context, they would put that in the past tense, even though they're still there, but this is an accomplishment, something that they accomplished while they were there, and that in itself is written in the past tense. So here we have plan. So there's our verb, our active verb. Plan in and out trip programs within framework of age and ability of campers to challenge potential barriers and heighten self-esteem. Developed engaging curriculum for in-house science fair, which has become a staple itinerary item for camps that exceed 1 week in length. Watching children at summer camp. I work with a team of other camp leaders. You see a difference right away, I'm guessing, right? So if we pay attention to the two first bullets, you'll notice a couple of things about them. Yes, we start with an active verb, one in the present tense, one in the past tense. In order to identify how to do that, imagine writing the personal pronoun I at the very beginning. So I plan or I developed. Don't write the I, but that will help you kind of prompt you to write the next word, which is a verb. And then we have the middle piece of that sentence, right? So what it is you did, and then we finish with the results or the impact that that had. And so there's really three parts to each bullet that you want to include. Whereas the final two, watching children at summer camp, and I work with a team of other camp leaders, what you're telling us there, what you're telling the reader is what your job was, what it was you were actually paid to do. And they don't necessarily care so much about that. What they really care about is how you did your job and what kind of impact you did, because that's going to tell them how you will approach this job with them. The next one we have is a volunteer. So in this case, we did merge the work experience with the volunteer experience into one section called experience. And in parentheses, I simply wrote volunteer. Now, if I had decided to separate these two sections, I would then make a brand new section, call it volunteer, all caps, very similar to the way I've done it with my previous sections. And I would write it exactly like I wrote it there. I'm not simply going to refer to myself as a volunteer. I will refer to myself under the volunteer category as chemistry tutor. Okay, so in this case, because I merged it with the experience, I did indicate in parentheses that I am or was a volunteer chemistry tutor. Same idea, we have the job title. Right below that, we have the organization, which of course replaces the university, if you'll notice in terms of keeping with that formatting. And then the date is over at the far right-hand side. And then we have, again, an accomplishment statement. So delivered engaging, thought-provoking sessions to groups of up to 6 grade 8 and 9 students with successful learning outcomes indicated through before-after surveys. Or I tutor children in chemistry. Now, the title's there. You're a chemistry tutor. We know what you do. Tell us how you did it. So don't just tell the reader or the potential employer what you were paid to do. Tell them how you did it. Okay. So let's have a look at that in a little bit more detail. So we take our task, tutoring children, and we identify what the skill is there, and then we turn it into an accomplishment statement. So in order to do this in response to a job posting, let's just use that as an example, take the job posting and identify the main skills that that employer is looking for in their candidates. Once you identify those skills, go back to your own work experience or volunteer experience or educational experience and identify times that you, in fact, use those same skills that they're looking for. Okay, so it does take a little bit of work. You got to wrap your brain around it, but it's worth it. And it's worth it because it not only plumps up and beefs up your resume, but it also preps you for the job interview, because these accomplishment sentences can then turn into really great job interview stories, which of course we'll talk about in another future webinar. So here we have, a tour guide, and the tasks for this tour guide is give tours, provide information. Now, in many cases, I will often see things like that. That's how they describe under their job descriptions what it was they actually did. They gave tours, They provided information. That's their 2 bullets. Now, the skills that we're looking to really demonstrate or prove would be skills, because we've uncovered this from the job posting: enthusiasm, presentation, confidence, or communication skills. And so we want to then think about how we did the job and ways that we demonstrated those types of skills. So in this case, it would sound something like this: guided informative campus tours for up to 500 prospective students, with surveys indicating the presentation positively impacted their choice. So we've taken it from give tours or provide information to this. Another example: the task itself is cash handling, serving customers, or stocking. We've identified from the job posting or from the job of what we know that they are looking for someone who can work well under pressure, multitask, who is confident, and can deliver great customer service. So let's see how that might look. Confidently, so here we have an adverb, so it's still okay. Confidently processed average of 80 to 100 customer service transactions daily, while ensuring stocks were replenished and area kept clean. Now, this does take time. You need to wrap your head around it, but I strongly encourage everyone after today's webinar, if you haven't already been doing this, because maybe you already have, to take a look at your resume and see if you can turn those tasks into accomplishment sentences by first identifying the primary skills that you really want to promote, right? So you start off with a power word or a verb in the present tense if you're still there, past tense if you're not there. Describe what you did, and then what was the value created, or how did you do that, right? Sometimes it really helps to start with a list of verbs, and you can find some really great lists online. You can also log into Career Connection and have a look at some of our resources. We do have accomplishment statement handouts there under your career resources, so check it out. And in that handout, you'll see this the rest of this page actually, and it'll give you an idea. So if you don't know where to start, perhaps start here. Have a look. So you led a project. Okay, so here's some really great verbs that might prompt a memory for you, right? So start with the verb and then fill in the rest. And then if you feel as though it's not quite finished, ask yourself, why? Why did I do this? What kind of impact did that have, or what was the result? And that will help you to write a complete accomplishment sentence that hopefully can be turned into a really great interview story a little bit later on once you score that interview. All right, so yes, every single time you should customize, right? So a few tips on how to do that is to first identify what it is they need. So if you're actually applying to a job position that has not been posted, first of all, good for you. I'm really happy to hear that. But if you don't have a job posting that you're working from, look online and just see if you can find one for a similar type of job and use that as a bit of a guideline. And then from there, identify the skills, identify the qualifications, and then hone your resume in for that. The truth of the matter is that everything on your resume should be truthful, but not everything should be on your resume. And so for one employer, you might choose to tell them this bit of information, but for another employer, you might choose to tell them something completely different, or how you did the job in a very different way. So it really does come down to what you choose to tell them and how. So we've covered this a little bit in how we're going to write our accomplishment statements, right? So once we identify the primary skills that the employer is looking for, we will then use terminology and use verbs that reflect that particular skill set. So for example, if we really wanted to push our teamwork skills, then we might consider, when we're describing what we did in our previous positions, we might consider starting with words like collaborated, partnered, or shared. If we want to show them that we are motivated and we get the job done and so forth, we might want to use words like developed, initiated, led, or lead. For leadership, right? If we wanted to demonstrate that we do have some leadership experience, and we might want to consider words like led, initiated, or delegated. And then to show impact, we might consider words such as increased, decreased, cost, time, so forth, or grew. So again, have a look at a verbs list. Find a good list that kind of categorizes it based on things like this, right? To demonstrate your teamwork, to demonstrate your leadership skills, so forth. And it will give you a really great list of verbs that might help prompt a memory for you to then include in your resume and in your job descriptions. The second way that you can do that is by your header placement. So as we went through the previous resume sample, you'll notice, of course, that I started with education, and it might be very relevant for many of you to start your resume with education because your education is what's most relevant to the reader. And as you pick up more and more experience, you, of course, will bring your work experience up before your education section. So you want to ask yourself, from top to bottom, what's the most important information? And as you go down the page, it should get less and less relevant. Still relevant, but less relevant. So the header placement can be moved and changed accordingly. Finally, with terminology. So again, just using healthcare or health science as an example, in some ways we might, for some applications, we might use the term patient, and for other employers, we might use resident or client. And it really does depend on the terminology that the employer itself is using. So just switching those little things around so that you're speaking a little bit more of their language is another great way for you to customize your resume each and every time. So moving on to applicant tracking systems, it is important to keep it relatively simple. The fact of the matter is we don't know necessarily which applicant tracking system one employer is using. So an applicant tracking system is a type of software that many employers, all levels of government, most, if not all, post-secondary, all education across the board, and a lot of larger organizations would use this type of software in order to receive and categorize resumes into their system. And in some cases, it can even be connected with their whole payroll. So it's really one big grand system, but we don't know necessarily which applicant tracking system each employer is using and what their applicant tracking system is set to assist them with. So knowing that and considering that, unless you've done, really great research, and I hope you have, and that employer was able to identify for you the type of ATS system they have and what it actually looks for in candidates. The general rule of thumb is to keep your application simple. An ATS system does only scan resumes. I haven't come across any that also scan cover letters. Those are usually in the other documents section, but all ATS systems are there to scan and receive, at the very minimum, resumes. And so you do want to keep your resume format relatively simple. It's best to err on the side of caution and not use templates, because templates will box your information, and many ATS systems have a hard time picking up that boxed information, those items within those boxes. So you might come across a beautiful template, but for this case, I would suggest still make your resume look beautiful, because it's very likely a human will be reviewing it, but it's best to stick with Microsoft Word, traditional format, very similar to the one that we just reviewed together. And you do want to make sure, of course, that you're picking up on their keywords and industry terminology that you have picked up through your research, or perhaps that you've identified through the job posting, and make sure that your resume speaks to that type of terminology. Example, client, resident, or patient. Many ATS systems will give you a variety of file types that they will allow you to upload your resume in. I always suggest that you just stick with Word. I haven't seen an ATS system that does not accept Word, So I would suggest that if you're given multiple options, stick with Microsoft Word, because we do know that they do not have any issues with Word, whereas PDF, even though it might say that they accept PDF, it might have a hard time picking up individual items within a PDF document, because it's more or less like a photo of your resume. So consider Microsoft Word for that. Now, if you do have a beautiful template that you really want that reader or that employer to see in the, you might have the option to upload that in the other category, where you might also upload your cover letter, perhaps some proof of certification or education and so forth. So consider, uploading a more traditional Microsoft Word one that still visually is attractive, but then you could also upload that really pretty template that you're also so proud of, perhaps in the other category. So that's one thing to consider as well. For the most part, keep it simple, avoid graphs and charts and so forth on that ATS resume. Okay, so again, here it is, for another view. Overall, keep it 1 to 2 pages. Newer grads, the expectation is usually around 1 page, but I'm not going to tell you definitively that that's the way it is. I would say, generally speaking, between 1 to 2 pages. References, and even references available on request, you don't need to put that on your resume. References are usually requested a little bit later on in the application process. And if they are requested early on with your resume and cover letter, keep it on a separate piece of paper, keep it on a separate document with the same header that you used for your cover letter and your resume. Depending on the font style, I'm kind of partial to Calibri, which is what this resume was written in. And you want to keep your font size about 10 to 12. For this, I believe it's about an 11. With Calibri, I wouldn't go beyond an 11. And definitely no smaller than half-inch margin. Some employers are sticklers to that full inch margin. So normal or moderate in terms of your margin size. You'll notice that this is delivered in visual bite-sized pieces, right? We really do want to spoon feed them the information and make it as easy for them to kind of pick apart and interpret and read as possible, because they do receive so many. So make their job easy by delivering it in a clear format. Make sure there's a good balance of the black and white. Already covered this. And then your label section. So going back to that applicant tracking system, is best to keep your labels, like your sections, labeled in more traditional terminology. For example, on my own resume, I sometimes like to be a bit creative, and my volunteer section, I might write as community engagement. Now, if I was submitting that to an applicant tracking system, I might choose to go back to a more traditional volunteer experience to label that section. If you don't have Microsoft Word, you can certainly write the document in Google Docs, and then it will allow you to convert it to Microsoft Word. Although some ATSs do accept Google Docs, again, I always say err on the side of caution and just stick with a good old-fashioned Microsoft Word. Avoid a variety of visuals. So in that, I mean, from start to end, you want to just have one font style. In this case, it's Calibri, but you'll notice that I capitalized my name. I made it significantly larger than the rest. I also capped. It's the only other time I would recommend all caps would be on your titles. I've bolded them to really make sure that they stand out. But for the most part, my visuals are very consistent, just like my format is. Before you hit send, ask yourself a few questions. Always ask yourself a few questions. If you've been in one of my webinars before, this is a page I will not remove. Will this information or this line get me an interview for this particular job? If the answer is no, in that you're proud of it, right? It's something that you've accomplished and you're really proud of, that's great. But if it's not relevant to the employer, and if it doesn't fill an important date gap or anything like that, it might be a good idea to remove it and reserve the information for what's most relevant to the reader. You can perhaps talk about it and address it in the interview, but remember the document's job is to get you the interview. So really try to keep it as relevant and customized to them and their needs as possible. Can a reader tell in the first 6 seconds what I'm applying for? So the format that I showed you with the job title, or if you choose to put a tagline and then that summary section, that in itself will for sure identify for the reader what it is you're applying for. And that just kind of falls in with the next point. Does the first third of the page entice the reader to read on? Remember, this is a mini resume and it's in direct response to their qualifications, right? That summary section up there at the top. So hopefully, if you've done your due diligence that way, it does in fact entice the reader to continue reading on about you. And did I get another set of eyes to look it over? It's so easy for us, if we've been working on this document for so long, it's so easy for us to make mistakes and to keep looking over those or missing those mistakes. So certainly please do get another set of eyes like mine to have a review of that. Finally, please keep it updated. You might have kind of the master resume that you just keep adding to and that you pull from in order to make a customized resume each and every time. But it should continue to grow and change with you as your career continues to grow. So keep it updated with that master resume. Okay. So moving into cover letters, the second part of our webinar today. A cover letter is an introduction of you to the employer, and it importantly links you with their needs. And in that, you describe to them what it was that brought you to apply for them. You'll see a stat a little bit later on, but most recruiters have identified that as their primary reason for hopping over to the cover letter and reading it, is to see why you applied to that company. And so a cover letter really does allow you to do that. One thing to know about the cover letter, though, interestingly, and some of you might already know this, is that most employers don't start with a cover letter. It's a bit of work to read a cover letter. So they first want to identify through the resume that you are indeed qualified for this position, you have the basics of what it is they're looking for, and then they'll hop over to the cover letter to get an idea for who you are and why you're interested in working with that particular company. Now, of course, that's not true across the board, but for the most part it is. But if you're applying for values-based companies, companies that are perhaps more in the nonprofit sphere, providing community services and so forth, those organizations might indeed start with the cover letter, and then they might then finish with your resume. But for the most part, they do start with the resume. This also allows you to demonstrate your written communication skills, right? So if you're saying you have strong communication skills, here is your proof. Here's your proof. And particularly if part of your role is to communicate through writing and so forth, then it's hopefully supported by a very well-written cover letter. So before we get into the kind of the structural breakdown of a cover letter, I think it's important to first identify how it ought to look, right? And so we've already covered the fact that your header on your cover letter should be the same as the header that's on your resume, which should also be the same as the header that's on your reference sheet. So you have your header up there, however style you want to do it, everything else will be left aligned, right? So after your header, and you might choose to keep your job title or tagline as part of your header as well. I think that's a really nice characteristics to have. Then you're going to have a line space. You're going to have the date that you will be submitting the application, another line space, the company information, so the company name, full address. You'll even have the contact person there as well, another line space, and then the beginning of your letter. Now, one thing to think about is who it is that you're addressing your cover letter to. Many people will just automatically jump to Dear Hiring Manager or Dear Human Resources, but might I suggest you take it a step farther and you contact a company, or perhaps use LinkedIn. For those of you that are coming to tomorrow's webinar, we'll talk about ways to use LinkedIn for research. but perhaps use LinkedIn or some other means to identify who that contact person might be. You can then perhaps call the company to confirm that that is the right person, or to just simply ask, can you please tell me who I should properly address my cover letter to for the science educator position that you have posted on your website. And they will say one of two things to you. No, we don't release that information. No worries. Is it human resources or hiring manager? They'll tell you that. Or they might give you a name. And so you want to confirm with them the proper spelling of the person's name as well as their title. And you can even ask if they can let you know what their preferred pronoun is. If you know what their preferred pronoun is, in this case, if it happens to be she, her, you could say, Dear Ms. Singh. If you're not sure, then you can just say, Dear Iris Singh, and then start from there, line space, and then we move into the letter. So for each paragraph, now for a traditional paragraph, cover letter rather, you can go with anywhere between 3 to 4 to maybe 5 paragraphs. I think 4 paragraphs is a really good start. So in your opening paragraph, remember this might be your first cover letter that you're writing for this company, but it's certainly not their first cover letter that they're reading. So you want to make sure that you hook them early on. Try to avoid starting with the more typical or generic, I'm excited to apply for, or I am applying for the blah, blah, blah position. Start with something that's interesting for them. In fact, try to include their company name early on in that opening paragraph, even that opening sentence. So catch their attention and begin to address their needs early on. Having researched Fraser Health and its projects extensively, I was excited to hear about the blah, blah, blah position. As a regular shopper at Winners, I understand firsthand the importance of providing excellent customer service. So in both of these examples, we put the employer's name first, and we also indicated that we were relatively excited about applying to this company. So early on, we want to identify the position that we're applying for and why we're interested in applying with that company. The second paragraph is where we go into our hard skills. So hard skills are skills that we have that usually require some kind of training or experience in order to develop. And we want to keep it, of course, relevant to the employer's needs for those specific hard skills as well. Include examples. So rather than just listing the hard skills that you have, let the employer know how you develop those skills or how you use those skills in the past in this second paragraph. As a laboratory assistant at ABC Corporation, I developed an easy to follow manual for practicum students, right? In our third paragraph, that's where we're going to take a shift over into soft skills. So that's how you do your job, right? A little bit more of those personal skills, those transferable skills, and it's how you will be essentially as an employee. And again, you want to support it rather than simply listing a bunch of soft skills that you have. You want to support that with an actual example or two. As a camp counselor responsible for 10 campers ages 5 to 8, I developed collaborative team skills, blah, 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 and so forth and so on. The fourth paragraph, you want to wrap it up. It doesn't have to be anything long and fancy. You're going to request the meeting, perhaps repeat your phone number there, make it as easy as possible for them to contact you. I welcome an opportunity to discuss the science educator position in more detail with you. Please contact me at this number to arrange a meeting. Kind of wrap it up. So essentially that is the cover letter structure. A few things that you want to keep in mind each time, of course, is that you do have the correct name, spelling, and pronouns. So take it from LinkedIn or even their website, anywhere else online, but confirm with them that you have the correct person, because as we know, people do not keep their LinkedIn profiles up to date. And in fact, websites might be incredibly out of date. So feel free to give them a call and ask them just to confirm that information. You're not asking them about the job. You're asking them just for the correct person's name. Research the company. So 63% of recruiters have all agreed that the primary reason they hop over to the cover letter, that's their number one reason, was for them to answer the why. Why is it that you want to work for this particular company? Write concisely and with confidence. And that's what another set of eyes will help you do. Me included. Ways that you can make your sentences much shorter, more concise, and thus come across as way more confident, including some of the terminology that you include. Again, focus on what it is you can do the employer and support it with actual examples. You're not simply regurgitating information from your resume, you're picking a point or two from it and you're expanding on it, right? You're kind of proving that you can do the job they're looking for because you've done something similar to that in the past. If you happen to have a referral, you've done some great networking, good for you, you have a referral, drop that in that first opening line of the first paragraph. If there is an option to submit your cover letter, it's not required, but it is optional, please submit it. Right. So again, looking back at that same study, 77% of recruiters prefer those who submitted a cover letter, and it does drastically increase your chances of being called in for an interview. So unless it specifically says, do not include a cover letter, I would always suggest you include it. If they don't want to read it, they won't read it. But if they do, and you haven't submitted it, you are guaranteed just about to go into that no pile. So please do submit it. Make sure that you submit it in the file that they requested. Again, an applicant tracking system will always accept Word. If it's Word and any other file, always err on the side of caution and choose Word. If you're emailing the employer directly, I would, in that case, suggest sending them the file in a PDF and then name the file what it is. So if you have the cover letter and resume merged into one PDF file and you're going to be emailing that to an employer, then you might want to identify that as being your full name, the name of the position. In this case, it's RA for Research Assistant, and application, because it implies there's a cover letter and resume in there. And then we will end it there with any questions. Don't forget to stick around during the question part because we will be doing the draw for the $20 Tim Hortons gift card. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and I'll see if anyone has any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chantal. Oh, it looks like there's we do have quite a lot of questions already submitted here, so I can actually get started with that question. For the first one, I have Darren Brierly asking, how far back should I go in listing my work experience? For example, is it relevant to list part-time jobs for more than 10 years ago?
Great question. And generally speaking, now I'm thinking about my audience and the fact that many of you are students or maybe newish grads. I would say it's really not that necessary to go past beyond 10 years. But once you do have some professional work experience under your belt, I would say anywhere from 10 to 15 years with your work experience is sufficient. I would suggest avoiding going beyond 15 years.
Awesome. Lina Arboleda, her question is it good to include experience no related to the position if I don't have it? Not related to the position. Experience not related to the position. There you go.
Yeah, so in this case, is it Lina? Is that correct?
Lina, yes.
Lena, yes. So you might choose to include your work experience on there because you might just be starting your career out in terms of, what it was you studied at KPU or elsewhere. And so for now, you want to let them know that you've been involved in the labor market. You do have some work experience. It's not relevant, but you do have some work experience there. And in fact, there's always ways to kind of make it relevant, right? Again, we're not listing those tasks on our jobs, under our jobs, we're listing our accomplishments. So letting the employer, the prospective future employer, letting them know how we work. And that's more so how you're going to want to include that information on your resume. So rather than focusing specifically on the tasks of the job, you will speak or reference more about the type of employee you were or are, right? The teamwork, any leadership skills, how you treat clients, and so forth.
Perfect. Thank you, Chantal. For the next question, this is a follow-up from Darren's question earlier. Is it relevant to list work experience in labor or customer service roles from more than 10 years ago if he was applying for a role in policing or municipal government?
Yeah, so again, I would suggest, sticking with about that 10-year mark, more or less. And again, it all comes down to how you write what you did in those roles, right? And so you don't want to focus so much on the task. You want to focus on the type of employee or the type of team member you were. So through those accomplishment statements. But I would say it wouldn't in that case be necessary to go back further than 10 years. Let them know you've been active in the labor market, but you certainly don't need to go back further than 10 years.
Okay. My next question is from Natasha. Is it okay to have color in your resume? For example, I have previously had a resume that had my name going vertical on the side with blue behind it, all along the side of the page.
I love color on a resume. I think it really jazzes it up. Absolutely, I would say color. That just kind of falls into, sometimes a lot of the really beautiful resumes I see coming my way are, they have nice color. It's very, very nicely done. But oftentimes it is a template. So going back to what I mentioned about the template and the applicant tracking system, you can certainly just do a traditional Word document, but add color in there. So yes, long story short.
So for Jocelyn, so again, this is about layouts. Is there a specific font size you should have for resumes? For example, the size of your name you mentioned should be bigger than the rest.
Yes, so it really does actually depend on the font style you choose. So if, for example, size 11 Calibri font is quite different than a size 11 Times New Roman font. And so I would say, generally speaking, around an 11, right? Again, it's between that 10 and 12 font size, which I think would be a pretty safe bet. Yes, your name should be the biggest thing on your resume, anything from a 14 and up. Your headings can be even the same sizes. Like if you're trying to keep it all on one page, make sure it doesn't look all cramped. But if you're trying to keep it all on one page, then you can easily make your headings the same size as the rest of the document, the same size as the body, but all caps and bolded. So you can keep it a size 11 as well. Keep your name, again, all caps, one or two size fonts above. Add some color in there if you want to really draw the eye and you want to, again, keep it to one page. So anywhere from 10 to 12 for the main body and 14 up to 18 for your name. I don't know, even beyond. It just depends on the style that you chose.
Yeah. Kama has a question. Do we write Cgpa or percentage in the education background?
Yes, you can certainly add your GPA from what I've read, various sources. I'd say keep it at no lower than a 3.5 for a GPA. But writing individual percentages for your courses, probably not that important. I would say if you want to put your GPA because you're particularly proud of beyond a 3.5, then go ahead and put that on there.
Lena Arboleda has a question. Is it relevant to add your experiences from other countries?
Please add your experience from other countries. The answer, in short, is absolutely. Just remember those accomplishment statements, right? So you're not just detailing the tasks, you're detailing how you did those roles. Doesn't matter where you did them.
Perfect. I think this next question has been answered already. It's regarding is it appropriate to list references, or would the sentence like available upon request be more appropriate?
Don't even
So,
need the sentence. Yeah, you don't even need the sentence on there.
okay, awesome. Next question from Bruno. Does that kind of accomplishment sentence pass through resume automatic filters or tools that many companies use?
Yeah, so you're referring, is it Bruno, did you say?
Bruno, yeah.
Yeah, Bruno, you're referring to the applicant tracking system, and absolutely it does. Yes. So again, you want to use that job posting or a similar job posting as a guideline, right? Pick up the verbs and the terminology. You'll often see them in a job posting. You'll see your responsibilities, what you'll be doing in this new job. And usually it's broken up into bullets, right? You will be delegating, managing, supervising, creating, whatever it might be. That's your intel. So you want to, as much as possible, use the same terminology, the same verbs and so forth to describe what it was you did in your previous roles. So those are ways to increase the amount of keyword counts and easily work with the ATS system.
Perfect. So Chantal, we do have quite a lot more questions in place, and I think we can maybe at least pause for a couple of minutes just to do the contest draw, and then we can continue answering questions for another maybe 5-10 more minutes.
Yeah,
Would that be right?
absolutely. And one thing that I do want to say is this is an hour-long webinar on a massive subject, right? Resumes and cover letters crammed into like what, 45 minutes?
Yeah.
So I invite you all to hop over to kpu.ca/careers and have a look at, first of all, Career Connection. We do have some really great resources there for you on resumes and cover letters and accomplishment statements. You can also make an appointment with a career coach if you do have any further questions that were not answered in this webinar. And of course, if you want to rewatch the webinar, grab some popcorn, rewatch it. Of course, it's going to be uploaded onto YouTube. So yeah, let's do that. Let's do the draw.
So stay put here in this call, and then we can continue our conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Congratulations. So again, we will be doing another draw tomorrow, and then for the rest of the webinar. So as long as you're here until the very end of our webinars, you might get a chance to win a $20 gift card. Okay, I guess we can continue with the questions. We still have a few more minutes. Chantal, are you still?
I'm here.
Perfect. Okay.
Congratulations, Alma. Yay! 20 bucks.
Yeah, that's like 4 cups of coffee. 5.
Yeah, Tim Hortons, it goes a little farther than Starbucks.
I know. Okay. Next question, Oran. International students in Canada are only allowed to work part-time during school. Should this detail be included in a cover letter?
No. Nope.
Oh.
I would, yeah, I would, to answer that, I would say no, you don't need to. Again, remember the purpose of the resume and the cover letter is to get you in for that meeting. And so initially they might think that they want someone who, is available X number of hours, 22, let's just say. And so if you mention that early on without being human to them, they might automatically disregard you, right? Put you in that no pile. We want you to be humanized to them. So we want them to call you in for the meeting. And it's in that meeting, once you've established rapport, that you can say, oh yeah, by the way, now that you love me and you want to hire me, right? But you become human to them. And that's what's most important.
Next question from Natasha. When we are listing our employment history that is customized for that employer, there might be gaps. Won't the employer look at that badly if there are years between jobs?
That's a really great question, and thank you for allowing me to clarify on that. Keep those irrelevant positions on there. You don't necessarily have to have a detailed bulleted list below them, but keep that on there under your work experience section so that they can see that you were in fact active in the labor market during that time. Optionally, you can break up your work experience section into two sections. Relevant work experience that has your relevant work experience, which would, of course, in that section show date gaps, but then other work experience that shows, that fills those date gaps. So by doing that, you're putting the most relevant information higher up on the document, but you're still including the other work experience. So again, you're going to use the same format for the other work experience, the non-relevant, the job title, the date, the employer, and no bullets. Whereas your regular one, you're going to have the job title, the date, the employer, and accomplishment statements.
Thanks, Chantal. Darren Brarely is the next one. First off, he's saying thank you. This is very informative as he has no idea about ATS, so that's great. In terms of his question, it also relates to gaps of employment. What if the gaps of employment were due to medical reasons? For example, is it necessary to list that he was rehabilitating from a motor vehicle accident for almost 2 years?
It's completely up to you if you want to include that in there. Just going back to that other study, to the study rather that I referenced throughout this webinar, employers do prefer to see, if there's a date gap, they do prefer to see the why in there. Of course, that often will mean disclosing some personal information. So it's completely up to you if you want to do that. One thing you could perhaps think about, is it Darren? Did I get that right? Darren, one thing you might want to think about is what else did you do during that time? So were you taking any courses? Did you spend your time, volunteering if you were able to, during that time? But oh, lovely. I can see it popping up on my screen, volunteering regularly. That in itself might be enough to fill that gap. But if you're okay disclosing that information, you could put it on there, right? You could put it on there that you were, recovering from a motor vehicle accident. And that's all you'd need to write during that time. But if it also shows that you were still proactive, you were still motivated and physically able to volunteer, then that's just an extra bonus. So going back to the original point, employers do prefer to see what people were doing during gaps from the labor market. And usually they don't question too much about a year gap. And I suspect that this information was from about 2020 survey. So, since then there's been a real shift because of COVID and the impact that that's had on the labor market. And so I suspect that number will grow. There'll be a higher tolerance for a bigger gap. But right now, just make sure that everyone's on mute. So right now, they're really wanting you to explain anything beyond a year, and up to 3 years, they're really, really wanting it. They're really, really wanting that explanation. So just a brief explanation.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for that, Chantal. Ashvin here is asking, how will we know if we are submitting to an ATS or if the employer will be reviewing the documents individually or directly?
So here's the thing with the ATS systems is that it's very, very likely a human will be reviewing the document. It's very likely. For the most part, ATSs do not kick people out. They might put you lower on the list, right? Like they're going to put everybody through. But you might be lower on the list, but it's very, very likely if you have, done your due diligence and put as many keywords in and you're applying to something that's pretty relevant, it's likely that it will be reviewed by a human being. So that's why I said, make sure to still make it look pretty. Like you still want to have, a nice format, easy to read, good clusters, nice, consistent format, because it is very likely that a human being might read it.
Okay, another question from Darren Brarely. For mature students or students who have recently completed their degree after a few years of hiatus, again, due to medical reasons, will it look absurd if I list that it took me 2 extra years to graduate? Should I perhaps just list the years that I continued consecutively until I graduated?
That's a really good question. Who asked this question?
Darren.
Darren. Good question again, Darren. That's a really great question. You know what? Just put your graduation year. That's it. You don't need to put how long you were in there for. Just put your graduation year. Just make it clear that you graduated that year. Yeah. And make sure that you identify the type of certification you have, right? If it's a degree, if it's a diploma, put that in there, but just put your grad year.
That's a great tip, Chantal. So from Natasha, if we are graduating this semester and we are applying for jobs to start after we are done, is it okay to say that we have that diploma even though we have not technically graduated?
Yeah, you might want to just refer to yourself as soon to be graduate or put in there when it will be, like you'll be graduating very, very soon, Natasha?
Yes.
Okay. Yay for you. But you will be graduating very soon, so you can just put, or soon to be graduate, and then, April 2022 or whatever it might be. But really, you shouldn't refer to yourself as a graduate quite yet.
I'm not sure exactly but in what reference this is from Lina Arboleda. What about if you're applying for a position and your experience was a few years ago?
Okay, so if you're applying for a position and your relevant experience was a few years ago, that might work for that other tip I gave earlier, where you can take your work experience and you can cluster it into two separate sections. Relevant work experience that has your older work experience in it. So within that section, it is in reverse chronological, meaning your most current will come first, but it's relevant work experience and then other work experience. So your other work experience will have your newer experience, but less relevant experience. But by breaking it up into two sections like that, you ensure that the most relevant experience comes up higher, even though it's older experience. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay. Next question, I believe this is from Sakshi. Should I avoid writing the same skills that are already mentioned in the summary by giving evidence that how I develop those skills, either at work or participating in group presentations? We're writing evidence.
Okay, so in your summary section, you're keeping it relatively general, right? You're keeping it quite general, and it's there to entice the reader to read on about you. And what they will do once they get past that summary section, they will then go through the resume and see proof of what you've generally written in the summary section, right? So if you're then saying that you have experience delivering presentations to groups of up to 20 students or whatever it might be, you might have that experience from various different spots, or if you're saying, or various different work experience and volunteer experience, or if you say something like, 2+ years experience delivering exceptional customer service, I'm then going to go, okay, where did that 2 year? Oh yeah, okay, so we have 2 year, say 1 year here, and yep, another 6 months here, another, oh yeah, so that's about 2 years, right? But you're summarizing it into general statements in the summary section, and then the proof is down within the document itself. So yes, you're repeating it, but you're being more specific under the specific categories, under your work experience, your volunteer experience, and so forth. Hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, I think so too. Natasha, I believe this is about resumes. If you're emailing it, what should we put in the actual email?
So there's, again, pay attention to the application process itself. So it might say to you, so email resumes to, those are so great because you get to email it to a human being as opposed to uploading it to an ATS system. But if in the posting or your instructions were to email in either Word or PDF in one file, file, or in two separate. So pay attention to that. Like, is it a separate cover letter, separate resume, or can you merge them into one? PDF okay? Is Word okay? Whatever. And then in the body of the email, you can simply write, hello, Chantal Rackley or Ms. Rackley, if you've identified the pronoun. Please find attached my resume and cover letter in one PDF file in response to the research assistant position posted on abccore.com. That's it, right? But you can also consider, for maybe less professional roles, including a very short cover letter just in the body of the email and attaching just a standalone resume. So in the body of the email, again, you might stick with 3 very short paragraphs, but you can certainly do that as well. That's also an option for you. But just pay attention to the instructions.
Okay, so I think we'll do a few more questions. Chantal, the next one, it's from Tarinder. I don't have enough experience. What should I write in my resume?
So with your resume, if you don't have any work experience or any volunteer experience to call from, you're going to want to put a big emphasis on your education, right? So you're going to want to put a lot of emphasis on how you are as a student, any student engagement activities that you've done, any volunteering on campus, anything like that. That can be a separate section. You can, even though it was while you were a KPU student, if you volunteered as a peer support worker, you can put that as standalone in a volunteer section, right? You're going to want to maybe put more emphasis on your group projects that you did while you were a student, or you might, emphasize and describe, some of your courses and how you contributed to those. One thing to think about, though, is if you find that you don't have the experience now, consider building that up while you're a student. So consider volunteering for campus events. Consider, applying perhaps if you can for student assistant positions on campus. So just look at various ways that you can, build up that resume. You can also join associations. You can, perhaps even develop your own project. Like if you're a marketing student, perhaps you can develop your own marketing project for a recently opened small business. Approach them and say, hey, maybe I could do this. And this is something you can put on your resume. So you could be pretty creative with how you can really promote yourself on your resume.
I really like that tip that you gave, Chantal, about actually approaching a small business. That's exactly what I did for another small business I knew, and did a marketing project for that person. So definitely that is something that you can definitely do.
Fantastic.
Wanting to ramp up your resume and beef it up. So yeah.
Yeah, it really is about being proactive and
exactly.
taking ownership and control. This is your resume. This is your career management. You're in the driving, you're the CEO of this, right?
Love that. Okay, a few more questions. Kamal said, can we get these slides? Is will the slides be available to the students?
I don't put the slides up, but there's certainly lots of resume and cover letter resources on Career Connection under career resources. And then, of course, for as long as the internet exists, this recording will be on YouTube. So
for sure. Yes, and I know a lot of the information that you've provided are from the handouts. So we actually do have. So yes, please go ahead and go into our career resources site and within career Connection to view all those resources. And thank you, Darren. Alma. I think this will be the last question. For the rest of the questions, we will try our best to email the students some of the answers that we have for you. Other than that, you can also simply just email careers@kpu.ca for any other questions, and we'll do our best to respond to those questions as well. So, oh, I just lost that. Okay, last question. Alma, if I have submitted my resume and cover letter and the company doesn't contact me in a few days, is it correct to call them or to send an email? I don't want to be rude. Thank you. It's a good one.
Yes. Next question. I'm just kidding. Yes, please do. Absolutely. Follow up with them. Let them know that you're really interested in them. And the way that you could do this is like this. You can either call them up and say, hi there, my name is Alma and your last name. And I just recently applied for the research assistant position. I was wondering if you can tell me if you've shortlisted candidates yet for interviews. And if they say, no, we're still going through that process, and you can say, okay, can you give me an idea of when you're hoping to begin the interview stage? Something along those lines. And you can write something similar for email. I would suggest finding the direct contact and emailing them.
Okay. Again, that's the last question for you, Chantal. Again, thank you everyone for joining the webinar. We do hope that you are attending our other webinars as well. So yeah, we look forward to seeing all of you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Alma, I'm not sure if you're still here, but if you are, if you can stay once everyone has leave, then I can talk to you directly. It might be easier this way.
Okay, Michelle, yes, I'm here. I'm still
okay,
here.
Awesome. We'll just wait until everyone is gone.